Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Farr and Beyond podcast. I am your host today, Scott Jones. Micah is not on the show today because we are actually having a special guest today, and Mike and I will be back actually later this week. Mike and I will be back with a brand new show for you guys. I think we're still talking about celebrities who we've lost due to addiction and everything else, and the great talent that gets lost in addiction and mental health. So we definitely want to continue that on our next show on Farr Beyond. But today we got a great guest. This is somebody that I've gotten to know quite well in the recent months, but she's been around doing great work for a long time. And I'm not gonna keep you in suspense. I'm gonna bring on, this is attorney Susan Ramsey, and Susan, let's bring you in. Sorry, I messed that up a little bit. There we go, Susan. Here we are. How are you today, Susan?
I'm great, Scott. How are you today?
I'm good. Now, did I say that right? Attorney Susan Ramsey, or is it Esquire, or is it lawyer? What is the term?
I'll come to any name you call me, but Esquire is sort of, in the old days, was considered the gentleman lawyer, right? But as a woman, I still can carry Esquire. I'm an attorney, I'm a lawyer. We generally consider attorneys those who have taken the bar exam in their respective state and have passed and have a license to practice law. So far, I have a license to practice law in the state of Florida. I had one in Connecticut when I first got out of law school.
That's right. Up in Bridgeport, I believe, right?
Bridgeport, Connecticut. That's correct.
That is where my oldest daughter lives, up there in Bridgeport. She's a school teacher up there.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I love Connecticut. I do. I think Connecticut's a great state. I was a nurse at Yale New Haven Hospital before I went to law school.
Yeah. Now that's interesting. And I know we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to talk a lot about your story and stuff, because you do have a story to do with addiction and alcoholism and different things. But you started out as a nurse. Was that kind of like right out of high school, I'm going to be a nurse kind of thing, and you went into medical?
I mean, I think when I was in high school, I think I thought about being a veterinarian, but I don't know, somehow my family convinced me that I should go to nursing school. And I did. And I actually went to first a 2-year program on Long Island, SUNY at Farmington. So in 2 years, I, took the nursing exam. I was a registered nurse, and I started working in the hospital. Actually, I went to Miami first because I was a young one and I wanted to try out different places. And I worked at a small hospital in southern Miami. It doesn't even exist anymore. Then I moved to Connecticut, where my friend was also going to school and working as a nurse. So that's where I got a bachelor's degree while I was working as a nurse in the intensive care unit at Yale New Haven Hospital. And then I went to the emergency room. And while I was in the emergency room, I also became a volunteer rape crisis counselor. So that's actually how I got interested sort of in the law, while I was doing that kind of nursing work. So I was on call. I had a beeper. If you remember beepers, it was like really cool. I was pretty cool. And then at times, as a nurse, I had to testify in criminal court on behalf of rape survivors. And this is many years for a number of laws that have been in effect for a number of years were passed that actually gave counselors some degree of confidentiality and privilege. But I was called to testify in a case which involved a criminal who had gotten out of prison shortly before he committed this rape, or actually it was a felony murder, which was a rape murder. So when he showed up in the neighborhood and he broke into this young woman's apartment and said, "Do what I say or else," she believed him. And anyway, so I got called to testify, and I was such a nervous little Nelly. I thought like lawyers were the smartest people in the world. I just had no idea. So I'm sitting up in the witness box, and I'm a little person, like my nose is what's showing over the witness box. And the prosecutor asked me the standard questions, which I can't remember what they were. And then I was about to get cross-examined, and I took this deep breath because I was terrified that I was going to say something. This is also speaks to my alcoholism. I may not be much, but all I ever think about, I was convinced the words coming out of my mouth were going to change the course of humankind. And the defense lawyer asked me if I worked for the New Haven Police Department, which I did not. He asked me this 5 more times. By the time we got to the 6th time, I'm thinking I'm getting the answer wrong, but I say, no, sir, and I giggle very nervously. Well, the jury just cracks up, right? Because they're like, this kid doesn't know what the hell's going on, and apparently neither did the lawyer. So we just happened to take a recess right then, and I go out, and the prosecutor's out there. And of course, again, I think like I've done something terrible. So I say, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I screwed it up. And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, what just happened in there? And he said, Susan, you didn't do anything. That guy's an idiot. And at that moment, I knew if that idiot could go to law school, so could I. So I credited him with I'm not going to repeat his name here, but after all these many years, I still remember who that was. And thank you very much, because that's what pushed me to go to law school. That's a true story. Well, most of it's true anyway.
Well, that's funny because actually getting the jury to laugh with you, because you nervous chuckle and they laugh with you, that actually means they're on your side, and that was a bad move on his part. So
yes, the jury was out 12 minutes before they came back with a guilty verdict, and he supposedly was doing life in prison, but I stopped following it after about 30 years.
So you're doing nursing, and then you have this situation where it's like, wow, I could help people and be a better lawyer than these guys, and better, was there anything specific about the system that you had in your head that had to change back then? Because like you said, it's the victim laws or the victim protections weren't anywhere near what they are today back then.
Right. So one of the reasons I could testify at all, because it's really hearsay, right? What the victim tells me about what happened is hearsay, is because under Connecticut law at the time, I mean, way back in the Puritan days, it was considered a dying declaration for a woman to come out on the streets and say she'd been raped, because she'd be stoned to death, right? So that's crazy.
Wow.
Obviously, we've come some distance since the 1700s, but, you have to think about that thinking. In today's day, we have a lot of laws that really protect survivors of sexual assault that are really wonderful. Like, your background, like prior sexual history. That used to be common in a criminal case. They'd say, well, maybe this happened, but you slept with 27 other people. I mean, like, stuff like that is not allowed. And that was kind of what you would see in the old days. And also just in terms of what the medical and psychiatric and psychosocial people understand about trauma and how trauma affects people, from the incident way into their adulthood. And also, if you look at even some of the statistics for people who have, especially women who have substance use disorder, it looks like 75% of women who have a substance use disorder have a trauma history of some sort. Either it's from, an adult event or a child event. So those are things that we collectively have a better understanding of. So we can help survivors of crime in all different ways. I mean, not just sexual assault, but other types of violent crime. I mean, one of the things that I really enjoy doing is I'm a member of an organization called the National Crime Victims Bar Association, which is only about 15 years old. And that organization is of lawyers like myself and many others, very, very talented lawyers who represent crime victims from individual sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and even other types of crime, like failure to provide proper security in apartment buildings or hotels. I'm going to tell the famous Connie Francis story, which you're probably old enough to know who Connie Francis is.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Others will not. But so Connie Francis, it was about 1976, somewhere in that neighborhood. She was singing on Long Island at the Westbury Music Fair. And for reasons I don't understand, she stayed in a Howard Johnson's motel, if anybody even remembers Howard Johnson's, right? Between performances. And at that time, Howard Johnson's, and this was typical of a lot of hotels and motels, that the entrance was a sliding door into the room next to a door. But you could just break into the sliding door with a screwdriver, right? Like it didn't take much. So unfortunately for her, she was sexually assaulted one of the nights. An unknown assailant, they never caught. But they did find out, her lawyers did find out that there had been prior complaints like that against the Howard Johnsons. And so she brought a lawsuit against the Howard Johnsons, which it really was a rare event, saying that, hey, you guys knew there were prior problems with the hotel security prior to my being raped, and you could have done something to prevent it. And at the time, that was a novel legal theory, but she won. She got a jury award, which was, for the time, pretty big. But that case changed the entire hotel industry, right? I mean, one of the reasons don't have keys anymore, right? And it's redone. It has to do with safety of the hotel. So stuff like that is like, to be part of that is just amazing. It's amazing because, I go to hotels. I have to go to hotels for business and stuff, and I want to feel safe in a town or, a city I don't know. So it's really, thank you, Connie Francis.
That's yeah, Connie Francis. Boy, that takes me back a ways.
Yes.
And she was one of the greats. Certainly one of the greats out there. That's kind of amazing because you have that level of expectation of safety when you go to a hotel. There's an expectation of security, and when they know there's a fault in the security, that falls on them. So I fully get that. I got to ask though. I mean, here you are. I mean, not that you're an overachiever at all, Susan, but you're a nurse and you're doing all these great things, and then you're counseling with victims. You're showing up in court. Now you become a lawyer. You're doing all this stuff. This is going to be a question that a lot of people are going to ask, and I've got my own answer to it, but I want to get your answer. How does somebody fall into an irresponsible pattern of drinking when they're so responsible with everything else?
It is really one of the most puzzling things, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I think that, it goes back to who I think I am. I am that egomaniac with an inferiority complex, right? Yeah. So even as a nurse, I mean, I became a lawyer in part because my ego was challenged, right? That I felt like, and I can look back on some of my early interactions as a nurse with doctors, for example. And I have the utmost respect for the medical profession. But that dynamic of being told things like I was stupid or I wasn't moving fast enough, like I didn't react well to that. I have, even as at my age, I have oppositional defiance disorder. So, it's how you kind of get from that. And so drinking and drugging for me, it was sort of part of the solution to this restless, irritable, and discontent mind I had, right? Like I never thought I was enough, no matter what I did, right? And I still, as a recovering alcoholic and drug addict for some years now, I still struggle with that at times, right? Like, am I doing enough? And so, do I think that had I not been drinking and drugging, I might have done better in law school? Well, probably, but I still got through it. So, hey guy and the C gal here, we still have the same license. But do I appreciate that looking back, there were things that would have gone differently, but the shoulda, woulda, couldas are what drives my alcoholism and my defective in perfection disorder, if you will, right? Like
Right.
I have this perfectionism which drives me crazy that I can't possibly achieve, right? And that was true, so I would go to school and I would do things because I was driven by fear and ego, truthfully. But when you get right back down to it, like the change, I mean, it wasn't that I never did things for other people during this period of time. In fact, my story would be I was more the victim of circumstances. I was like the Joan of Arc of the Jewish girls from Flushing, Queens, right? Like I was a martyr because I was doing all this stuff that the rest of you weren't doing, right? Like the story of me being a single mother, right? Working full time and being the only one feeding my children was, it was true, but what role did I play in sort of creating the chaos that I was living in the middle of? So, I am at risk of that now. I mean, I made the joke earlier today with somebody from Farr, like left to my own devices, I need to keep myself busy and moving forward. And for me, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is where I go, service is what works for me. And that's my story. So some of the stuff I do now, for Farr and for other places has a lot to do with that, right? I have been blessed with an education and a skill set that can help other people.
Well, I want to talk about this for a second because I want to talk about all these great things that you're doing now. Certainly, I want to talk about Farr and in the task force and all the other things you're doing. But this is a tripping point for a lot of people, especially someone who's professional. It's pretty easy to take someone who is an addict who has lost everything living on the street and say, listen, I could bring you to something better. Or take an alcoholic who has lost everything and sitting in a bar all day and saying, I could give you something. But for a professional who is still in their profession, especially professions like medical and law and where egos are kind of rampant, what was it that made you decide that you needed to do something different? How did you reach that point, given that you were in a position of success?
It's a really interesting question because I was not, as they call them, a one white chip wonder, right? So
okay.
In my initial years of, I never got here. I never got to the point of surrendering. I always say my position was overrun. I just couldn't get it anymore, right? So, I mean, while it's for some people, it didn't look like my life was a disaster. In fact, I'm in the same actual house that I was when I got sober. But on the inside of the house, there was a great deal of chaos, right? There was, my house I was about to be foreclosed. I hadn't paid the IRS. I hadn't done a lot of these things because I kept thinking I was barely surviving. And that was the point. Now, do I remember the moment that I said out loud and to somebody else, like, I don't drink anymore? I do, actually. And it astonishes me that the words came out of my mouth, right? So I will tell this story. So I have been working as a lawyer, right? And I did, at that time, my daughters were all teenagers, right? And I was the only one feeding and supporting them. And so it was like, we were a wolf pack, but I was clearly the alpha of the pack, if you will. So there was a man, another lawyer, I had been stalking romantically for about a year, right? I really wanted to go out on a date with him. Yeah, I don't know that he knew that I was stalking him, but I was in my own way. So anyway, we had a case together, he and I. He was on the other side. The case got resolved. And then, of course, then I wanted to go on a date with him. So we set up a date, and it was at a local restaurant. And the night before, I had been drinking. I can't even remember what I did. And I woke up on Saturday morning thinking, I'm not going to go on this date. I really feel terrible. Why did I do this to myself again? Why do I can't stop? I'm drinking. I'm drugging. My life's a mess. Blah, 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 blah. Right? But something moved me to get up and go. Right? So as I'm driving to the restaurant, I stop in a little liquor store because my hands are shaking from the alcohol the night before. So I take a few, I don't know what it was with the little bottles, like somehow that wasn't drinking. I'm really crazy. Anyway, and I used to hide them for myself. It's crazy. Anyway, so I take a pop because I can't. And I walk in, and he's sitting at the bar of the restaurant innocently enough. Like he doesn't know any of this craziness. And he says, hi, hey, can I buy you a drink? And these words came out of my mouth. No, I don't drink. And I'm like, who said that? Wait, who said that? I don't think it was me, but I haven't had a drink since, right?
Wow.
What moved me to say that is still a mystery to me. But the truth is I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I had enough. I couldn't, there was nothing left. I had no more resistance. And I don't know why I resisted so hard retrospectively, right? Because to me, sobriety has been the easier, softer way, right? It definitely has. But I didn't think that for about a decade. And when I look back, I really can't articulate it. And, I like to think of myself as an educated woman, but I really can't tell you why I fought so hard against the idea that recovery was better than insanity.
Right.
And that's been my experience, and that is my truth, right? Is that recovery is better than the insanity I had before. And did my life change in ways I can't even tell you, right? Like at the time that I stopped drinking, I had been fired for the first time in my professional career from a job. Right. And he was very nice about it, because he felt that I was the single mother of 3 kids. So it was basically like, I'll pay you for a little while, but don't come in the office anymore. That's pretty bad. Right. So, because it wasn't that I was going in and blowing things up all the time, but I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing.
Right.
Missing the occasional deadline, and none of them, thank God, were catastrophic. But I wasn't suiting up and showing up and participating in my job, right? I really wasn't.
And it's only a matter of time before one of those mistakes is catastrophic too, and people see that coming.
Yes. So he was not wrong. And, so from there I had to find a job, new in recovery, and, and go from there and start all over again. But all I could do was one day at a time, right? So it took a number of years for me to get the mess, and most of it was financial, right?
Right.
Straightened out. I still make the joke that I owe the credit bureau points. I mean, because it took a long time. And, when I look at it, it's because it took me a long time to get in that deep. It was going to take some time to get out. But, I can tell you that some days the cornerstone of my financial plan is still to win the lotto. I mean, I don't have it all worked out yet, but I really believe that if I continue to show up and suit up and show up, as they say, that, it's going to work out the way it's supposed to. And as long as I'm continue to attempt, at least, to put, one foot in front of the other and do the next right thing, I'm going to be okay. And all's going to be well.
Well, Susan, I must have read the same book, because that was part of my financial plan too, was to win the lottery.
Right.
My problem was that I never turned the page on that book and found out I had to buy a ticket. I never bought a ticket. I just dreamed about winning. I was one of those people who thought one of my neighbors is going to get a winning ticket and just come over and hand it to me. And I thought, what a delusion, right? What a freaking delusion. But I love the story of how that's your sobriety came about, or how it started, because it's hard to put sane thinking to describe insane action.
Right.
And alcoholism and drug addiction and all that stuff is insane action. It's hard to describe it. And we try to put it in a little bow, and this is what it means, and this is what it means. But most of the time, it is just pure chaos. And sometimes the act of getting sober could be just as confusing and just as chaotic. Why did I say that? Why did it come out? Why did I stop that day when I did something much more horrible a year before? Why didn't I stop then? So it's very, very confusing. And I think having that much chaos to come out of that, it's so much easier to find peace in your life once you've known that much chaos, right?
I couldn't agree with you more, right? Like the way you get into heaven is backing out of hell, right? I really believe that. And, I lived in hell on earth, and I never, ever want to go back to that mindset again, because it was just, exhausting, and just, you could see only the end as being a big, bad something or other. And, of course, and I'm sure you are, share this experience. We watch other people sometimes, and, they're lost to this disease, and, for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one of the reasons I am so deeply involved with Farr and with the task force, and I'm also the vice president of a recovery community organization in Palm Beach County, the hub, is that I want to give people what I have, or to help them get there somewhere, because I do believe recovery is possible for everyone and anyone, no matter what their background is. Not everybody's going to have my experience, of course, like you were talking about. Some people are going to end up, homeless and hopeless without anywhere to go. But I think that we all can help people get there. And, certainly with the task force, and with the task force in particular, I mean, the initial part of the task force had been largely, and they still have that, in terms of criminal investigations and people being held criminally accountable for just, human trafficking, drug trafficking. I mean, all the worst of the worst. And, many people have heard these stories. They've been repeated on TV shows and all that kind of stuff. And the truth is that stuff was going on, right?
Yeah.
There were operators who were doing terrible things to make money at the expense of young people who had substance use disorder. And that, there's still some of it now, but it's not anywhere near as bad as it was 10 years ago.
But all over there is still, because we're talking about a very, very vulnerable part of society. When you're talking about people who are in the ends of their addictions, beginning of their recovery, that is a super vulnerable time. And there are always going to be people to take advantage of that, even though it was super prevalent down here in South Florida for many years. That has changed, but there are still things that happen and all over the country. And you got really involved in that, didn't you?
Yes. And certainly in Florida. Throughout the country, though, you do see this popping up. I mean, it tends to be in vacation states. Like even if you look at how it happened in Palm Beach County, right? How did Palm Beach County specifically and South Florida become the epicenter, if you will, of treatment centers and recovery residents? Well, a couple of things happened around the same time. So in the Affordable Care Act and the Mental Health Parity Act that are around 2007, 2008 were passed. What's the Mental Health Parity Act? So under private insurance through employers, right? Like a lot of people get their insurance from their employer. You can't have policies that discriminate against mental illnesses versus other illnesses, right? So, for example, diabetics or people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, they may require multiple hospitalizations for their chronic medical condition, but there are no arbitrary caps as to how many times you can go get medical care if you are a diabetic who's having a diabetic experience or ketoacidosis, something like that, right?
Yeah.
They don't say, okay, sorry, that's it, you die now. But with substance use disorder and other mental illnesses, there were arbitrary caps, right? You could have one admission, you could spend X amount of dollars in a policy year. So that federal law changed that. Also, the Affordable Care Act made accessible health insurance to a lot of individuals who were not otherwise covered. So, of course, the bad operators took advantage of this and said, okay, we are going to open up a treatment center. You don't need to do much. Like, come on down. And, instead of following the dictates of something like the American Society of Addiction Medicine or the people who are really studying and treating substance use disorder, that kind of just did their own thing. And that's where you got the urine drug screen mills, where people were getting subjected to unnecessary testing to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I mean, there's even a case, and I know this because I represented the family, where a young woman got a urine drug screen and an oral drug screen the same day, right? They're testing the same thing, but they had different codes for the insurance. So that's why they did it. So the insurance company didn't catch up on it. I have one case where they tested the patient's DNA twice. Now, as far as I know, Scott, your DNA doesn't change. Okay? I don't know. There may be new technology. So it was all that kind of insurance fraud. And, the bad thing that happened is the good operators were being squeezed out by the criminals. And on top of that, the insurance companies were starting to react badly. And if anybody asked me, I would have told them, insurance companies are like battleships. It may take them a while to turn around and get you in their view, but once they do, it's over. And so that's kind of what happened on the other side of it. So people who are seeking, inpatient treatment for substance use disorder are going to have a harder time doing that with their health insurance plans. And the other thing that's evolved, which is good news all the way around, is that there are more accepted standards through the American Society of Addiction Medicine as to what is appropriate treatment and what isn't. Because it ain't one size fits all. For example, I never went to treatment. That doesn't make me any better or worse than the next drug addict, alcoholic. It just makes me different. There are people who are going to need to have months of inpatient. It's on a continuum, just like diabetes is, like other, there are diabetics who, if you tell them to stop eating M&Ms and eat right, their blood sugar is going to be completely managed and they're going to do fine. There are other diabetics that they may do everything you tell them to do, but they're still going to have trouble and they're going to need medications. They're going to need all sorts of other kinds of help. And it doesn't make them any better or worse. They're just different biochemically. And that's what we need to start talking about.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of this stuff you're talking about are things that nobody knew. Parents are sending their children to rehab and they're, and there's getting 3 or 4, 5, 6 urines a week. And, the rehabs and the ones that I knew back, but while this was coming to a head, these guys were making $5 to $6 to $7 million a year just on urine analysis. That's it.
Right.
And when they cracked down, we had all these companies running around saying, how are we going to stay alive now? So they had to find other shortcuts, which created more problems. But families were never really, and even today, there's still not enough education out there about what are good practices, what should you be looking for. I know you're involved with Farr, which is our sponsor for the show, which is Florida Association of Recovery Residences, which is a part of NAR, the National Association. But for Farr, that's about making sure that the aftercare, that the sober houses and the sober living are doing the right things and treating the clients right, are meeting the standards. How do we get the standards out there so that people can understand them in regular society? Is that something that people even care about, Susan?
Well, I do think people care about it for a lot of different reasons, because I think, unfortunately, fortunately, if you will, the opioid epidemic, as it will, certainly opened the eyes of many, 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 many people who hadn't really understood what it means to have substance use disorder, opiate use disorder, right? But we had kids and people of all ages dying literally in the streets from drug overdoses, right? I mean, that's what changed a lot of, unfortunately, but fortunately, hearts and minds of people, because it became, yes, this has happened in my family, or you knew somebody who lost a child. I mean, I can't tell you how many people over the years I have talked to who are not in recovery, but have family members and are looking for help. Like, what do we do? How do we figure out what's best for our loved one, our wife, sister, child, whatever have you? And that's a really good question. So there are standards, and there should be standards, and we want to encourage standards. These are what in the medical world might be called standards of practice, right? What's acceptable standard of care for somebody with substance use disorder. So sometimes called best practices. Whatever you want to call it, the concept is the same. We collectively should all agree that the following things are the basic standards to help somebody who has substance use disorder. We do it with other medical conditions. I mean, right? In training, learns how to treat, heart disease, learns how to treat, liver disease and diabetes and chronic obstructive pulmonary, anything you had to learn, and there are standards. There are medical standards for that. So one of the things that Farr is responsible for by state statute, as well as in practice, if you will, is to help operators come up to those standards if they need help, that we are to give out that information, and it can be to the public at large. One of the issues that Farr is experiencing is in certain areas, people don't want recovery residents in their backyards, right? Because they think those people are moving in, right? They're gonna capture our pets and sacrifice them, or whatever they think, right? And that's part of what the advocacy of being in recovery is about, and why personally I completely respect anonymity as a core principle of the 12-step programs I go to. But my anonymity isn't as, I think that when we recover out loud, we help other people. We help other people from dying, because if this grandmother with the gray hair can be a sober, recovering person doing that kind of stuff, then you can too, kind of thing. And that's the same thing with the advocacy for Farr, right? For the operators themselves, we try to be an educational a tool for them, where they can find resources and things like that, because a lot of depends on where they're located as to what access to other resources they may have. And Farr is now launching into a new era, right? We have more organization, and I hope you're going to interview Michael Schlossman, our new chief executive director and chief legal officer. I am the general counsel for the Florida Association of Recovery Residents. And I know you've been talking to Micah every week. So, we're trying to get out there to talk about Farr and to talk about paths of recovery, right? Because not everybody has to do it the same way, their choice of recovery, but we all need to have standards as to what treatment goes on, and then specifically in recovery residents, how those are operated. I believe what others believe, that, maybe you went to a treatment center, but recovery really begins after that, right? Once you start moving and living in the world and dealing with day-to-day issues. And that, the most important thing for any of us, I mean, this is true for me, is to have a safe place to rest my head at night. It's really hard to do anything else if you don't have that, right?
You are absolutely right.
jobs, anything. If you don't have a place that you feel safe sleeping at, then it starts as simple as that, and that's really important.
That is so important. You said so much there, Susan, and I agree with you. I mean, I think it's time for us. I mean, the anonymous thing, which I understand. The real purpose of that was that when a group of people get together, the anonymity is about, listen, just because you're a doctor or a business owner doesn't mean what you say is more important than the guy on the street. That's where it really came to play. It really wasn't meant for a secret society with secret handshakes and all sorts of stuff, because Bill W. and Dr. Bob used to walk around the street saying, hey, we're alcoholics. We want to help people. And they used to go to hospitals. So I think it's time to be a little bit more open. Those people in recovery, I think we have a responsibility to show people that being in recovery is just another phase of life. It's not a big deal. It doesn't have to define anything other than this is the point of life that I'm in, and it's all cool in the gang. I mean, you can't get a good Hollywood movie role without going to at least 3 rehabs now. That's just the way it is, right? It's not a horrible thing anymore. But I think what really is, we need people to understand that there's levels of care that need to be expected and should be expected and should be performed when you're putting somebody in treatment. And one of the things that's also missing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but whether it's SAMHSA or the National Institute of Health or even Joint Commission or NADAC or any of those places, nobody has a standard for measuring success in recovery. There has not been an agreed upon standard level of success. So every treatment center that says, oh yeah, we got an 80%, 90% success rate, it's not based on a national standard. Do you agree that that's something we need to work on somehow?
Yeah, I think that's basic medical science, right? Is right. What? I mean, we don't take people's gallbladders out unless we knew that it would affect, that would stop the gallstone pain, right? I mean, right. Afterwards, but you know what I'm saying? This disease needs to be treated like what it is. It's a mental illness. It's a disease of my brain. My brain is not the same as a quote unquote normie's brain, period. Right. And so one of my, criticisms of substance abuse treatment and people who say that like 80% success based on what? What are you basing that on? I'm going to tell you one more story. So early on in this endeavor, I too wanted to know the answer to that question. Is there any evidence that treatment works? Right? Where's the evidence? Show me, where's the beef? Where is it? So I was Googling around, and one of those boxes jumped up and said, can we help you? Right? Because I thought I was on some other website. So I'm like, okay, I'll play. So I write, yes, my daughter is 26. I knew exactly what to ask, right? My daughter's 26 years old. She got fired from her job for drinking. She may also be using drugs. I have great insurance, and I'm looking for a place with the best success rate out there. Can you help me? And they write, yes, of course we can. So we text, we go back and forth. So finally, the bottom line is I get somebody on the phone, and what their 90% success rate was based on, 90% of those who volunteered to be followed up at 3 months. So like, you're not saying out of the 100 patients that 90 of them we're only saying that out of those who voluntarily agreed to be followed, 90%. So I said, you couldn't even get 100 with that group? I mean, like what? It proves nothing. Yeah. So what? So that's the part where we do need to spend time in analysis. I'm going to tell you where there is data now. Okay. There is data on the efficacy of medication for opioid use disorder. There are some long-term studies that talk about that. But you're right. If we don't agree what success looks like, then how are we ever going to study it? I mean, I don't know what it looks like. I mean, some people don't think it's long-term abstinence. Some people think it's something else. This is above my pay grade, but like
Right.
that has to be decided. That has to be figured out for any studies to really mean something substantial.
That's right. That's right. And that's why I brought that up. And, because Susan, you get involved in so many great things and stuff. And I see that this is something that, this is going to be a big leap forward if we can find a way for measurable success. And that way we can study more. Yeah, we need standards, but we also need to always look forward for something new as well, because obviously we're not winning. I would love to say we're winning the battle, but we are not even close to winning the battle with addictions, with alcoholism, even with mental health. There are just too many people that fall between the cracks and don't go treated. So we need to constantly grow with this thing. I feel like we're still on the ground floor of a very tall building,
I think we maybe a little bit, maybe we're on the second.
Maybe I'm a little cynical, but yes, maybe a little bit.
Because, organizations like ASAM are spending a lot of time, and there is a lot more literature out there that's peer-reviewed literature on the subject. Some of it's above my, but I try to read up on it and look at this kind of, because there is more and more, and I view that as being very hopeful for the future, right? That society is beginning to understand it and not making it, a moral question, like you're a bad person, right?
Yeah.
I'm a sick person trying to get well, not a bad person trying to get good. And, we're looking to science, to real medical science to help us analyze what is the best practice for somebody with this condition or somebody with that condition. And so I'm going to remain optimistic for the time being.
I don't mean to be a curmudgeon and, everything sucks. But, it's just we've got a long way to go. And I think the biggest thing, and we're going to wrap up here in a moment, the biggest thing is that we need to reach a level of zero tolerance where there is no number of acceptable overdoses. There is not a number of acceptable suicides. There's not a number of acceptable losses. If there's one, it's one too many. And we are falling into this kind of malaise of, since there are hundreds of thousands of people dying from these things, that when we get below that 100,000 number, we feel like we've made great progress. It's progress, but there's nothing great about it until we get all the way down. So I really want to zero tolerance. There is no acceptable number of losses from addiction and mental health issues. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. 100% I agree with that. So do I think we're ever going to get there? Maybe not, but I think we have made some progress, and I think we can continue doing this as long as people like you and others are still working towards, that outreach to the world about what can we do.
And you, of course, with your service to all of us by holding people accountable for how they're treating people and what's going on in there, and helping to set those standards. And it means a lot that we have people like you to work with, Susan, and you've become a good friend and just somebody that I admire very, very, very much. I'm just going to end with this, Susan. Let's say we could jump ahead. I know it's, just have fun with it. It's not a healthy habit all the time, but let's jump ahead, say 5 years or something. What would you like to see happen in the next several years when it comes to how we treat addiction and everything? What is something you would love to see happen?
I would love to see that we as a society understand this to be what it is, a disease of a brain, right? That organ has a disorder, a disease, just like any other organ. So it's not all filled with the emotional, you're doing this, you people are doing it to yourselves, you got what you deserved, all that stuff is gone. Because as soon as that happens really in a big way, then I think the doors of ways that we can help everybody who suffers from this illness, to help them go forward and be, part of society, like we like to say, productive members of the tribe of us on Earth, right? That are doing things to help other people. And that may sound a little like, Pollyanna, but I really believe that. And I do think that every single person can do one little thing that will change it. And it doesn't have to be like, I said as a woman in recovery going to AA meetings, it doesn't have to be that you are volunteering for all the stuff that I might or you might do. It can be just showing up for another person, because that is how the world has changed, right? The hearts and minds are changed by one person at a time.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's a simple formula. It's if one person does a kindness for 32 people, which is a simple thing to do during a month, 32 different people say something kind, do something understanding. Now, if each one of those 32 did it for 32 others, all you'd have to do is do that process 32 times, and the entire planet, every human being on the planet, will have been touched by kindness. So it all starts with one person doing one good thing.
I agree.
Just do it. And I want to remind everybody, if you want to know more about what's going on at Farr, you can go to info@farronline.org for an email, or you can give them a call at 561-299-0405 for the Florida Association of Recovery Residences. A great resource if you're looking for good sober livings and other resources that are necessary to really, really drive that recovery home. So please check out Farr. And if you want more information about One Brother, One Sister, or sponsor the show, please go to onebrother1sister.com, and all the information is there. And through your donations, we train first responders, veterans, to deal with trauma, addiction, and mental health issues. And we do it at no cost to them through your donations. So please check it out at onebrother1sister.com. Susan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
This has been very special, and I knew you were just going to be full. We've got so much we could talk about. I'd love to do this again. Maybe in a couple months we'll get together.
Yeah.
And
I can talk forever, Scott.
And certainly, if something happens with any sort of changes in policies or anything that we think is important, Susan, we'll definitely come to you so you can give us some help on explaining what's going on. All right.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Scott, for having me.
Susan, thank you so very much. Susan Ramsey, attorney, and of course, board members, participant, helper at all of these organizations throughout South Florida. There's too many to mention, but all I can say is it's somebody who is led by their heart and brought their brain to match. So we appreciate it. We really do. All right. You've been watching the Farr Beyond podcast. Make sure that you like this channel, share it with your friends, subscribe, and most definitely leave your comments, because we like to read those and we want to know what you're thinking, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show. For now, I'm Scott Jones, for my guest, Susan B. Ramsey. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye now.